In the last episode, I talked about my shyness and how when I was younger, it was very difficult for me to be able to talk to people. I even gave an example to where my mom sent me back to the store one day to take something back that she got from the supermarket, a mistake, and I was afraid to even take it back to the customer service center because I didn't know what to say. I was just so shy. And as I thought about that, and I looked at what my father went through every day with my mother and his docile attitude, I probably picked that up unknowingly from my dad. As I stated again in the last episode, I didn't know how the man should act in his house. I didn't know how the father should be. I didn't know how a husband should be. And since my mother was so domineering in that house and my father was so docile, I probably subconsciously or unconsciously picked up that shyness from my dad. And that was, or probably could have been, a detriment to my existence if I had not turned out into who I am today. A lot of what my dad went through, unfortunately, with regards to his shyness and his standoffish kind of attitude, was because he had a speech impediment. My dad stuttered. And because he stuttered, people treated him different. People thought he was stupid. People thought he was, I guess in today's era, you would say people thought he had intellectual disability. And that was far from the case. My father was a very intelligent man. My father was very worldly. He could sit down with you and talk to you about just about any subject that you decided to bring up, not just sports, but anything. He read 3 newspapers every day, and he can quote just about anything that was happening in the world. So by no means was my dad not smart. He was very intellectual. He was just, people just intimidated him, and he was insecure because of his speech impediment. But by the same token, my dad could sing like a bird, like nobody's business, and that was, and attributed his love for music. My dad was a music man. He brought, back in those days, we called them 45s, home every week when he got paid. And fortunately, we had an opportunity to be submerged in the Motown sound. And his favorite group was the Temptations. And, we listened to Smokey, Temptations, Stevie Wonder, the Supremes, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles, Gladys Knight and the Pips. We were inundated with music. On Sundays, we were inundated with gospel music. And again, my dad was staunch about not dancing to gospel music or not even clapping your hands or snapping your fingers, because in his eyes, gospel music was just that. It was the gospel, and it was sacred. And he taught us to respect that. So my father was a unique individual in his own right, but being a young man and growing up under the umbrella of a personality in the house that was far dominant than the other personality, it kind of steered us in the direction of our mother and not our dad. And also, her unwillingness to kind of balance it out when it came to being both parents in the house. She wanted to rule. She wanted to be the king. She wanted to, the queen of the house. And, if that meant to stand on him to be on top, then that's what she did. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to vilify my mother. I'm not. I love her to death. To this day, I miss the hell out of her. She was my inspiration. She was a part of me being who I am today. She taught me confidence. She taught my brother confidence. She taught us to never back down from a fight and never back down from anybody. And if you're right, you hold your head up and you go in there with your chest stuck out and you fight for your rights. But if you're wrong, then you be man enough to suffer the consequences. You know, and she taught us morals and values and right from wrong, and to recognize when people were out there doing crazy stuff and not to get involved in that, and to have good judgment. You know, she was a great mother in that sense. There was nothing she would not do for us. She would give us the shirt off her back. If she had 50 cents, we got 25 or 30 cents of that 50 cents. You know, she went without so that we could have, you know, and that's what kind of woman she was. So don't get me wrong about who she was as a mother and as a female, but with everybody, you know, you get an opportunity when you live with them to peep their flaws. And she certainly was not without her flaws in that house. There were times when I wanted to get at her myself. There were times when my brother wanted to get at her, but you know, she was our mother, and again, we respected her, and in no way would we do anything like that. We come from a big matriarchal family, and my grandmother, Anna B. Scott, was the focal point of everything that happened in the Scott family. Yeah, my last name is Bell, but my mother's maiden name was Scott. And she had a number of brothers and sisters, and we come from a huge family. And so, again, my grandmother was, as far as women goes, probably the strongest woman that, besides my mother, that I ever been around in my entire life. And my mother picked up a lot of who she was from her mother. Her mother had to raise 13 children by herself, and that was a feat in and of itself. And so I would suspect that my mother watched that every day of her life, and just like I picked up some of the things from my father, my mother definitely picked up some of those same traits in terms of being a strong woman from her mother. So she, in a lot of respects, couldn't help who she was. She was just who she was, and in no way would I trade how she raised us. I just had my own personal feelings and things that I had to deal with when it came to how she treated my dad. And you know, I guess today we call that it's a man's thing. And I guess it was. It's a boy's thing. It was a man's thing. So, you know, that's my own personal kind of stuff that went on. My relationship with my brother is paramount. You know, I love him like you would not believe. You know, if anything would ever happen to him, it would destroy my entire being. He's been my man since he's been my man, since he's been my brother, since the beginning of our lives. He's 5 years younger than me. I just, you know, have an affection for him like nobody's business. And up until this day, you know, as grown men, we are still thicker than thieves. I never remember really even fighting my brother. You know, I would get upset with him. I would, you know, push him away. I would not let him want to follow me around with my friends because, again, we were older than he was. But he just clung to me like nobody's business. You know, he would tell me about the crazy stuff that I would do around the house when we first moved up there, because we were the second or the third black family on our block. It was pretty much an all-white neighborhood. And almost virtually overnight, the whites that were living in the area moved further out to Montgomery County, and the neighborhood became black. And even when that happened, the neighborhood was still a fairly decent neighborhood. It didn't really start its descent probably until I left and went to college in the late 70s, and left UMES in the late 70s. But up until then, West Oak Lane, we call it Uptown, was a pretty decent neighborhood to live in. It had its gritty parts, it had its gangs, it had its negative activity, but for the most part, there was nowhere in that neighborhood that I was really afraid to go to, and I knew the area really like the back of my hand. So West Oak Lane was a pretty decent neighborhood to grow up in, So when I went to school, I never caught a yellow school bus. I caught SEPTA to go to school, and it was my job to be on the bus stop at Andrews Avenue and Cheltenham Avenue at a certain time in the morning to catch the C bus, to take it all the way down to either Broad and Alny and then jump on the subway and get off at Broad and Logan, or continue to stay in the C bus and take it all the way down to Broad and Lindley and get off and take the J bus, which went up to the Alny area of Philadelphia to go to high school. I went to Alny High School, and we made that trek every day. Prior to going to Alny, I went to Wagner. Prior to that, I went to William Rowan. And I walked to elementary school, I walked to junior high school, but when I got to high school, we had to catch public transportation, so I never caught a yellow school bus. My brother, conversely, caught a yellow school bus at William Rowan to get bused up to the Northeast to go to junior high school and to go to, I believe when he went to high school, he caught public transportation as well, but he definitely caught the bus to go to Fells and to go to Wilson. Fells was elementary school, Wilson was junior high school back in those days. Definitely caught the bus, yellow school bus to go to those schools. So, growing up as a youngster in Philly, you had to be savvy. You had to have some sort of wits about yourself in a big city like that. And you have to understand you got traffic, you got Philly's a city of row homes. Philly's a city of narrow streets. Philly's a city that was designed by William Penn on a grid, and so one street went north and south, the other street went if one traffic pattern drove from the south to the north, the other traffic pattern drove from the north to the south. And Broad Street was the longest street in Philadelphia, which divided the city in half. And so if you ever got lost in Philadelphia, the saying was to find your way to Broad Street and you could pretty much find your way home. Philadelphia's a city of neighborhoods, and you were identified by the neighborhood that you lived in. You from West Philly, you from South Philly, you from North Philly, you from Uptown, Germantown, Mount Airy, West Oak Lane, you from Kensington. They call it the Badlands now. Even back then they called West Oak Lane. West Oak Lane and Mount Airy was Germantown to everybody. The whole thing was Germantown. It was never broken down into the way it should be broken down to, where it's Germantown, it's West Oak Lane, it's Mount Airy, it's East Mount Airy, and it's East Oak Lane. That's north, above North Philly, basically northwestern Philadelphia, except for East Oak Lane, because East Oak Lane is on the other side of Broad Street. It's on the east side of Broad Street. Broad Street runs north and south from Cheltenham Avenue north all the way down to the bottom, which is the Naval Yard in South Philly, again along the street in Philadelphia. The subway runs from Fern Rock, which is in the Logan section of Philadelphia, all the way down to Broad and Patterson, where all the sports stadiums are. The Wells Fargo Center, the Citizens Bank Park, and Lincoln Financial Field. That's where all the sports complexes are. That's the end of the Broad Street line. And when you go further than that, you hit the Naval Yard. and that is the absolutely end of Broad Street. And in between, from south to north, are the neighborhoods. And the neighborhoods each has their own respective personalities based on their economic status, based on their ethnicity, based on their culture, based on a lot of different things. And so again, that's how people are identified in Philadelphia, through the neighborhoods that you live in. And so as a young boy, I had to figure all this out, and as a child, again, you have no clue about any of that. You're just growing up, you're just having fun, you're just playing outside, you just listen to what your mother and father say. But as you start to become a young boy and you start to become a teenager and you start to venture out into different parts of Philadelphia, those are the things that you have to learn about the city in order for you to keep yourself safe. And you have to imagine that I grew up on the tail end of the civil rights movement, 68, 69, going into the 70s. And living in a northern city was certainly a little different than living in a southern city. But we still went through our phases of racism, and were treated in certain ways because of the color of our skin. But I really never felt overwhelmed with that. I always felt like, I understood what racism was all about. I understood that as a black person there were certain things I could and could not do, but it never really put me in a position to feel prohibited to be able to go in any particular neighborhood, not based on my race, but really based on the violence of the people who lived in that particular community. I knew that there were certain gangs in South Philly, certain gangs in North Philly and West Philly that would kick my ass if I was over there and they found out that was from another neighborhood. So that wasn't about racism, that was about territory. And there were certain areas in Philadelphia that I knew not to go to because the probability of me getting robbed and stuck up was real. And again, that wasn't about racism, that was about territory, and that was about economics. And so, those are the kinds of things that I had to be cognizant of. But fortunately for me, I was a basketball player, I was an athlete.